has to be intentional, right? Like, you're smart enough to know that's not accurate. Well, welcome back to Apologist Reacts. It has been a while since I filmed these. We've gotten some great comments requesting different videos from some other movie scenes and kind of reacting to actual abortion dialogues. That's been a little bit more popular than the movies, but I'm planning on doing both of those. But I thought first what I would do for the next several of these videos is take a look at some of the videos that were coming out with commentary around the Supreme Court leak of the Alito draft that would overturn Roe v. Wade if it happened. And I haven't seen these. I definitely saw on Reddit around the time, pro-lifers definitely being mocked a lot, and certainly pro-choice people being very upset, very frustrated, things like that. But I thought it might be interesting to take a look at how late night hosts and other kind of public commentators were talking about this. So I'm going to take a look at that. So it's going to be a little bit more reacting to what people are saying, maybe a little bit more like what I did with Reversing Roe a long time ago. It was a documentary that I reacted to. It's kind of my first React video, and a lot of people have still kind of said that they liked that. And so I'm interested in taking a look at what people had to say. So let's take a look. This is Seth Meyers, something that he put out called The Shocking SCOTUS Leak and the GOP's Decades-Long Plot to Overturn Roe, a Closer Look. Let's take a look.
5 conservative justices on the Supreme Court are apparently poised to overturn Roe v. Wade and erase a women's constitutional right to bodily autonomy, subverting the will of the vast majority of Americans and defying a half-century of legal precedent. For more on this, it's time for a closer look. As everyone undoubtedly knows by now, 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court appear poised to strike down Roe v. Wade and erase abortion rights in a ruling that would deprive tens of millions of women their fundamental right to make healthcare decisions for themselves. We know that from a truly stunning leak of a draft opinion. And while there have been leaks before, a leak of this magnitude seems virtually unprecedented in the history of the court.
It is cataclysmic, I think, for the reputation of the court and even for the internal operations of the court. This is how they do their work. They do it in secrecy. I cannot think of another time where a full draft opinion has leaked early in the process like this. You cannot overstate how big a deal this is for how the court operates. The trust is shattered, and I think it's going to take a long time for the court to recover from this.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that their trust has been shattered. How will they ever recover from this breach of their personal privacy? Maybe Samuel Alito can start wearing a shirt that says, "My judicial body, my choice." We never get this sort of inside look. We never get this sort of inside look at the private machination.
So the implied argument is that because the Supreme Court justices presumably all want this kind of the way the Supreme Court works, which has always been in secrecy. You can only have even audio recordings of oral arguments. Cameras are not allowed in there. There's I think maybe only one picture that's ever been taken during oral arguments, and it was a long time ago, and it was obviously someone who wasn't supposed to do that. But generally speaking, that doesn't happen. I think there's interesting arguments for and against the level of secrecy that happens at the Supreme Court. I don't have a strong opinion about that, but the implied argument is that because they care about this, then they should also protect the right to abortion under the idea that there is this right to privacy. And that doesn't work for a couple of reasons. One would be that there are just a lot of even pro-choice lawyers, thinkers, constitutional scholars that don't think that Roe versus Wade, which, kind of put everything on this right to privacy, was really firm ground. I was just reading this morning several quotes from pro-choice lawyers, one from someone who advised 3 Democratic presidents who was saying this is on shaky ground. I don't know that Roe will last. These are people who want abortion to be legal, but they're saying Roe versus Wade might go, and maybe that's fine because Roe versus Wade is just not a good opinion. Maybe can be replaced by an amendment or something like that. And so trying to base everything on, no, the Supreme Court was right in 73 to base everything on right to privacy is I don't think not the most compelling argument, at least to constitutional scholars, for whatever that's worth. But also there's a question-begging nature to this. Like there's clearly an implied, like a hidden premise, as we say, that abortion doesn't kill anyone. Because then, of course, if it kills someone, that is going to trump privacy concerns. You wouldn't let someone abuse their kids in the privacy of their own home or whatever. So it's cutesy. It's this kind of like implied contradiction, or like seems like it's an apparent contradiction. But when you look at it more closely, it's not a contradiction. Like Justice Roberts, who was furious about this leak, he would, of course, not say that they should be allowed to kill people, within the Supreme Court building because everything is like it's just not the same. And I think people do this a lot of times. Like I was just emailing back and forth with a pro-choice person yesterday, but in our dialogue, he was pointing out what he saw as an apparent contradiction in the fact that there are a lot of like conservative parents who would argue, like, for example, in Florida, that teachers shouldn't be able to talk about LGBT issues with their kids, but then this is, shortly after the horrible Uvalde school massacre, that like some of these same people are saying that teachers should be able to be armed in the classroom. You're saying like that doesn't make sense. You don't even trust teachers to talk to your kids about these issues, but you would trust them with a gun. I say, yeah, that looks like a contradiction on the surface, but it's not weird to me to think that some people would be opposed to teachers, like being concerned about teachers' ideology and how that might affect their kids. Versus, like, if a teacher felt confident enough with a handgun to have it in their desk, in a self-defense situation, they're going to use it regardless of their ideology. I don't care about the ideology of the firemen trying to put out a fire in my house either. Like, it's just not the same. I'm not saying I have a position on, like, whether teachers should be armed or anything. I'm not arguing for or against anything there. I'm just saying that's not the contradiction that it looks like, and this is kind of like that. So watch out for those things. There are times when people, and I'm not saying Seth is acting in bad faith here. He might actually think, or his writers might actually think that this is a real contradiction. I'm just saying sometimes people think that things are contradictory when they are actually not. And the way to discover that is to try to understand where, these people are actually coming from. And if Seth took a more charitable view of where pro-lifers were coming from, then he would see this is actually not that great of an argument. But it'll make people laugh and might effectively get a lot of people who aren't thinking about it very carefully to think, oh yeah, pro-lifers are super hypocritical or whatever.
Because of the leak.
There has to be consequences, Harmeet. For this individual, whoever it was, the Chief Justice, it's incumbent upon him to bring every law clerk before him. Give me your phones. I'm sorry, or the FBI. Give me your phone. We want all your accounts. We got to do our own. We have to do our own look at every device that you've ever used and find out who did this.
I like that they just pan over the Supreme Court justices like they're like, it could be you. It could be you. Was it you? The privacy of the court has been violated, and nothing is more sacred than privacy. So give me your phone. We want all your accounts, your Uber, your Pinterest, your Seamless account. I want to know if you've been ordering suspicious woke foods like green juices or quinoa burgers.
All right. So again, that's the same privacy faulty comparison that he made earlier. It's kind of the same argument being made. I think it is interesting how much of this story was about the leak versus the content of Alito's draft, of Justice Alito's draft. There was a really interesting point made on the Advisory Opinions podcast with David French and Sarah Isgur early on. I think they had the best podcast about this topic. And they said, everyone's assuming that this was a pro-choice, clerk or whatever that leaked this. And the idea would be that let's expose this now and get everyone protesting and put a whole lot of pressure on the Supreme Court, and then maybe, one or two justices, maybe Kavanaugh changes his vote and goes with something more narrow victory for pro-lifers that arguably Chief Justice Roberts probably wants. We don't know, obviously, but that's kind of the guess. But they argued, it could have also been a pro-life person, given that this draft was so strongly put, that maybe a pro-life person put it out because they were worried about someone changing votes, like maybe Kavanaugh. And it's like, I'm going to try to lock people's votes in now because presumably you wouldn't want to change your vote in a public way. The vote changing, which does happen a lot between oral arguments and the final opinion, like votes do change back and forth. That famously happened in Casey versus Planned Parenthood. Justice Kennedy changed his mind at the last minute. And so it could have been either a law clerk for either side. If there's a pro-lifer, they would have been trying to like lock in, like, here are the votes right now. We want, Dobbs to go a certain way. We still don't know who the leaker was. I don't know, but it's just kind of interesting that everyone here is assuming that it was a pro-choice person, and we should be looking for woke food and looking at the emails and stuff.
And how do you know it's a liberal? It could have just as easily been a conservative, Ginny Thomas, who leaked the opinion of frees the majority.
Okay, so he's making the same point, and he's right. We don't know who it was, but given that, we don't know that it wasn't Ginny Thomas.
In place and stop the Chief Justice, John Roberts, from trying to convince one of the other court's conservatives to soften their stance. I have no idea. But the fact that they're all freaking out about the leak instead of celebrating the victory is telling. It underscores yet again that even at the height of their powers, these people always have to play the victim. If they want to.
So I don't know if I agree with the way that Seth is like summarizing like how this went. I feel like I saw a lot of pro-life people actually, I mean, at least celebrating. Like, there's no reason to claim victory because this isn't a final draft. This is an opinion. Like, everyone understood that. It was a peek at where this might be going. And given that it's basically what I and many other people said probably would happen after hearing the Dobbs oral arguments late last year, like, there's just like one more piece of evidence. It's like, this is probably, where it's going. There were even pro-choice commentators that were saying at the time, like, the interesting thing here is surprising thing is the leak. What the content of this draft is actually basically what we expected to happen. So when you say like pro-life people are playing the victim instead of celebrating, it's like, well, we're not celebrating. In fact, I put out a tweet that was kind of trying to get people not to be too celebratory right away. And a lot of people did that, kind of said, like, we don't know where this is going to go yet. We might not know until late June still. But of course, the leak is also a story that a lot of people were talking about and speculating about. And so I guess it's not that weird to me. And I don't feel like that's a plain victim thing. I don't know what the intent was on the Fox News commentators here. Maybe they did want to spend more time talking about the leak than the controversial nature of the content of Alito's draft. But there weren't that many pro-life people that were like claiming victory either.
A free car on Wheel of Fortune, they'd immediately start whining. But I already have 2 cars in my garage. I don't have space for a brand new Stingray. This is so unfair. If that doesn't strike you as an insane reaction, here's something even more unhinged. Fox News personalities referring to a leak of an unclassified document as an insurrection.
This is an insurrection against the court, and it needs to be found who did it, and whatever legal means can be taken against them needs to be taken.
I am so glad that Ari used the term insurrection. That's exactly what it is, but let's take it one step further. This is an insurrection not by some guy from some state who got hot under the collar and went to D.C. and got overheated at a rally. This is insurrection by a person who is paid for by the taxpayers and who has a duty under his particular job and employment to keep his mouth shut, and he didn't do it. So it's an egregious form, if you will, of insurrection, and I hope that everyone will use that term because if what happened January 6th was an insurrection, this absolutely is an insurrection.
First of all, total side note here, but what's with the beard, Mike Huckabee? You look like a hillbilly Santa Claus. Ho, 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 Merry Christmas. Here's a pack of cigarettes and a Dr. Seuss book with the racist stuff still in there. Second, do you think you guys might be projecting a bit with this insurrection nonsense? Leaking a document is not an insurrection. January 6th, when a mob of rioters violently stormed the Capitol, that was an insurrection. In this case, someone posted a piece of paper online. Here, I'll prove which one is worse. Do you think Mike Pence would rather be whisked out of a building by Secret Service while a mob chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," or read a leaked memo that said, "Hang Mike Pence"? Do all these pundits whining about the leak really think this is what will shatter the integrity of the court? Not the fact that...
So I think this is a more fair point. I agree it is weird for pundits to be calling this an insurrection, especially given where, I think they all were on the use of the term insurrection after January 6th. I think we see, if you watch like documentaries about January 6th or listen to like real like in-depth reporting, you find out that January 6th was more complicated than just like this one intent. Yeah, I agree. This is a pretty awkward place for conservatives to be planting their flag, especially if they said that January 6th that should never be referred to as an insurrection.
The point is, we don't know if this ruling will change at all before it's published or how, but what we do know is that this is the culmination of a decades-long effort by conservatives to turn the court into a political weapon and aim it straight at abortion rights. They've been plotting this out in the open for decades. As early as 1989, there were 4 conservative justices on the court who made it clear that they were ready to overturn Roe and essentially invited anti-choice activists to help them by proposing new restrictions on abortion.
From almost day one after Roe was decided by the Supreme Court, legislators who opposed abortion came in and tried to pass restrictions.
So what do you expect to happen? The Supreme Court completely took this issue out of the people's hands and made a ruling. They wiped all of the state laws off the books, replaced it with Roe and Doe versus Bolton. If pro-lifers actually think that abortion is killing several thousand babies every day, like, what do you expect them to do about that? Like, put yourself in their shoes. Like, then you're going to try to get Roe versus Wade overturned and, brought back to the stage or try to pass an amendment or whatever. Like, what do you expect them to do? As far as you can tell, when President Obama is nominating someone, he's not wanting to nominate someone who thinks that Roe versus Wade should be overturned. There are some people that argue that this nomination process that happens in front of the Senate with cameras on for several days, like maybe that shouldn't be done with cameras because it kind of turns into a lot of politicians just kind of filling up their time trying to get a soundbite that'll get their base excited as opposed to asking very particularly interesting questions or things that would be actually helpful. But it's been a long time that everyone's kind of realized one of the main things that's going to get asked about is Roe versus Wade, regardless of the justice, regardless of the political leanings or who nominated them. That's what happens when you make this a Supreme Court issue. And this is one of multiple reasons that there are a lot of pro-choice constitutional scholars and lawyers who think that Roe versus Wade shouldn't have gone the way it did. Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought maybe the fact that people are still talking about this so much, the fact that this issue is still so controversial and the Overton window is not moving nearly as much on this issue as it has on a lot of other social moral issues, maybe that's because the Supreme Court did such an extreme move with Roe versus Wade. And if they had a softer touch with it, or maybe not gotten involved at all, then there are a lot of things about the Supreme Court and nominations in the country would be better. And maybe the abortion conversation would be very, very different. This is what happens when you take this away from the states and make it a Supreme Court issue when a lot of Americans are strongly opposed to abortion.
In 1989, a Supreme Court decision known as Webster gave the pro-life movement a boost when 4 justices indicated they were ready to consider overturning Roe v. Wade.
What Webster did is it emboldened those who wanted to push the question. And it said to them, okay, it's all right. There's 4 votes here on this court to overrule Roe. We can pass bans on abortion. Let's do that and get the question directly before the court.
That was 1989. You know how long ago that was? Just to give you an idea, here's what I looked like in 1989. This is what the conservative movement, a radical minority deeply at odds with the vast majority of voters, has been working towards.
Wait. The conservative movement is a huge minority? I don't think so. Look at opinion polls. That's not the case.
Years, and that's why they made their Faustian bargain with an obviously monstrous individual in Donald Trump, so they could finally cement that majority. To him, he was just the final piece, the culmination of a scheme that had been out in the open since at least the Reagan era. It's why they stood with him through all his many deprivations and indignities and numbed themselves to his many crimes and abuses so they could finally achieve this outcome they've been working toward for half a century. In fact, Trump made the bargain explicit. He repeatedly told Republicans they had to vote for him, even if they didn't like him, in order to get the judges they wanted.
If you really like Donald Trump, that's great. But if you don't, you have to vote for me anyway. You know why? Supreme Court judges. Supreme Court judges.
So I think this is basically true. I wouldn't word it the way that Seth is, but I actually think it's a good thing that most pro-lifers, as far as I can tell, who did vote for Donald Trump, did so not because they agreed with the way that Trump talks about people or like think that he's like a particularly moral or maybe even, like a super bright person or something like that, but they did it because it was like they felt like it was him or Hillary Clinton. And they knew what they were going to get with Hillary Clinton. Like I talked to a lot of pro-life people, including pro-life leaders, that it's like they plugged their nose and voted for him. Would you rather they have like excitedly voted for him because they liked everything about him? Like that, I think arguably that would be worse. Donald Trump is forever a part of this, and that will also affect our conversations. And pro-life people need to be ready for that, ready to acknowledge that Donald Trump is a big reason why the Supreme Court justices that we have are who they are. For a lot of pro-life people, that's awkward and uncomfortable. And we've got an article on this about like not feeling like you have to defend every single thing that pro-life people do. If you're talking to a pro-choice person who's really upset because a pro-life person, the last time they talked to a pro-life person, they were mistreated, don't feel like you've got to like defend the pro-lifer. Like just say like that was really wrong. They shouldn't have called you names like that. I would never do that. I would love to have I would love to hear you out and have a dialogue. Like you don't have to feel like you have to defend everybody. If you're a pro-life person that doesn't agree with some things about Donald Trump or some things that he did or said or whatever, like that's the common ground. You point out that common ground. So you really wish that it was a different, that someone else won the GOP primary in 2016, but this is how it went. Like you're gonna have to try to find common ground that way, but don't lie. If you're one of those people that like, if you still have a MAGA hat and you love everything about President Trump, there are those people, then don't lie. Be honest about that. But that is going to be a hurdle in some of your dialogues for whatever that's worth.
Have no choice. Sorry. You have no choice.
He sounds like the only kid on your block who has a pool. Sorry, but if you want to use the pool, you got to be friends with me. Sorry. And I'm hearing it's going to be 88 and sunny all week long, so... Trump ripped the mask off the Republican Party because there were times when Republicans and leaders of the religious right tried to play coy, lying to us about what they were actually up to and insisting ludicrously that they weren't really going to outlaw abortion. They know it's deeply unpopular and far outside the mainstream of public opinion. An NPR poll in 2019 found that only 13% of Americans supported overturning Roe. 13%. For context, the movie Gigli has a 13% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Any opinion poll about Roe v. Wade, you have to take with so much salt because there's so many people on both sides of the issue that don't understand what Roe v. Wade and Doe versus Bolton did. Those polls are just not that helpful. I think the polls that are asking, do you think abortion should be legal in this point of pregnancy for this reason, and like has a bunch of those, I think that is more specific and more helpful. And then you can say, well, here are the things that Roe v. Wade allows. Like Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton allows like all of those things. And so you're for some of them and against some of them. Like generally speaking, the majority of Americans are pro first trimester abortions being relatively unrestricted, but especially unrestricted in the hard cases. Rape and incest, there's something wrong with the baby. Of course, life of the mother, everyone agrees on that one. And are less comfortable with even first trimester abortions for socioeconomic reasons. But then when you get into second and third trimester, then you get a majority of Americans being opposed to that or at least wanting more restrictions on it. Like that is functionally where, at least my understanding of like the best, most accurate way to summarize in a brief way where Americans stand on the legality of abortion. But Roe versus Wade polls are just not that helpful because so many people don't know what Roe v. Wade is. I think more probably do now, like people who are paying attention, because I think most articles from both sides that I've seen on this have explained that if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, this goes back to the states. It doesn't ban all abortions. Like, I feel like more people are getting to know that, but I think there's still so many people that, especially on the pro-choice side, that don't understand like what Doe v. Bolton did, and they don't understand what happens with the combination of those things, that their views don't actually end up agreeing with everything that Roe and Doe made legal.
I love that movie. It's not good, but anytime my wife and I hit a rough patch, we lock eyes and say, if they can get over that. So they knew this is a massively unpopular move, which is why even as they plotted out in the open for years to overturn Roe, they also insisted to us that we were ridiculous for thinking abortion rights were at stake. It's why Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch lied to the Senate, or why the co-chair of Trump's Evangelical Advisory Board said in 2018, the left is going to try very hard to say this is all about overturning Roe. But Trump threw all that out the window when, in a craven bid to grovel for the support of the religious right, he just came out and said he would appoint pro-life judges who would overturn Roe.
Do you want to see the court overturn Roe
Well,
v. Wade?
if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, that will happen. And that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court.
Having to do with abortion, if it ever were overturned, it would go back to the states. So it would go back to the states.
Some women won't be able to get an abortion.
No, it'll go back to the states.
By state? No, some.
Yeah. Well, they'll perhaps have to go to another state.
And that's okay.
Well, we'll see what happens.
He's so cavalier about a woman needing to cross state lines for access to life-saving health care. It's maddening when someone who loses his
All right. Life-saving healthcare. That is a very inaccurate label for abortion. Like, everyone agrees on the medical procedures to save a woman's life who has an actually life-threatening pregnancy, like an ectopic pregnancy. Basically, everyone agrees on that. Some might call it an abortion, some might call it something else because it's not elective. That's kind of an internal some pro-life people kind of fall on one or other side of that, whatever. Basically, nobody thinks that women should have to commit suicide via pregnancy. Like, that is not a thing. So therefore, abortion is not a life-saving health procedure or something. Almost all abortions are elective. At least 3/4 of them are chosen for socioeconomic reasons. And that's based on Guttmacher Institute data. That's the other side. That's the research arm of Planned Parenthood. That's not some like pro-life think tank or whatever. That was very, very deceptive. So much so that, like, as someone who tries to be so charitable with the other side, to the point that a lot of pro-lifers get bugged at me because they feel like I'm being too charitable. Like, even I'm like, that has to be intentional, right? Like, you're smart enough to know that's not accurate. That is a rhetorical move to make abortion sound much, much more critically important to women surviving pregnancies than it actually is.
over even the smallest slights tells you the thing you're worried about is no big deal. Remember, this is a guy who, if a restaurant didn't have the right ketchup for his steak, would bitch about it at rallies for the next year and a half. They said, "We're sorry, Mr. Trump, we don't have Heinz, we only have Hunt's." And I said, "Hunt's, that's not a real ketchup." We know that about Hunt's. I hate to say it, but it's not. We love Heinz. No, we love Heinz. Trump ripped the mask off the entire corrupt enterprise and just laid out the devil's bargain he made with the GOP for all to see. He even said explicitly the list of judges would be chosen by the Conservative Federalist Society. I doubt he even read that list. He probably just picked a name off it the way your aunt orders a fun cocktail on vacation. "Oh, a horny caterpillar. Don't mind if I do." Which is why it's all the more grotesque and absurd for Republicans who supported nominees like Neil Gorsuch or Brett Kavanaugh to suddenly claim now that they're shocked by what's happening.
Today, Senator Collins reacted to the news with a brief...
So here's why that's not true, is because pro-lifers have been so frustrated in the past by how many Supreme Court justices who were appointed by Republican presidents ended up supporting abortion. At least 3 justices in Casey v. Planned Parenthood supported Casey v. Planned Parenthood as being we're not overturning Roe versus Wade. It's kind of a, like, we'll see. We'll see how Kavanaugh turns out or whatever, like, given that just for so long, you can't really know exactly where someone is on this topic. There are vague ways to kind of get out of those questions. You can say, well, it's precedents, and just acknowledge that's true. Well, that's factually true, but that doesn't tell you whether or not they think it should be overturned or not. There is a reason why pro-lifers were, at least some pro-lifers were surprised by the draft. I was surprised by the Dobbs oral arguments and surprised to think that Roe might actually get overturned, because I've been very pessimistic about that. But there's a reason for pro-lifers to be at least a little bit surprised, because they have been disappointed so many times in the past on this.
Statement saying in part, quote, if this leaked draft opinion is the final decision and this reporting is accurate, it would be completely inconsistent with what Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh said in their hearings and in our meetings in my office, unquote. Senator Murkowski today, too, also suggested that Gorsuch and Kavanaugh perhaps had not been fully honest about their positions.
If it goes in the direction that this leaked copy has indicated, I will just tell you that it rocks my confidence in the court right now.
I'm sorry,
So I can't speak to what those justices said in closed-door meetings. I don't know if they actually lied or if they said basically the same thing that every justice on both sides says, about. Well, I mean, obviously, you've got nominees from Democratic presidents who have very explicitly said that they would not want to overturn Roe, but then you've got a lot of Republican nominees who have been vague about that. And for all I know, they gave the same answer in those closed-door meetings, and what the legislator heard was like a stronger opinion than they were actually hearing. That's how miscommunication happens. There's a reason people miss each other. It's because sometimes what you're trying to communicate gets heard differently by the other person. So we miss each other. And so I don't know if anyone actually lied.
Rocks your confidence in the court, and when you found out the tooth fairy wasn't real, did that rock your confidence in dentistry? Wait a second, then where the hell have all my teeth been going? I, for one, don't believe they're this gullible. I think they knew it would come to this, and now they want to feign surprise, because for all their talk about snowflakes, Republicans take the cake every time. You were mean to my friend who was applying for a lifetime appointment. You leaked a document that rolled back women's rights half a century. How are we supposed to know a thing that was going to happen that everyone said was going to happen? Why does it smell like guacamole in here? Republicans have been playing the long game and plotting this for decades. The only way to combat them is to take the fight head on, to enshrine a woman's right to choose in federal law, stand up for the majority of Americans who oppose this extremist ruling, and make it an issue Republicans can't dodge. We can't just sit around and hope Alito will take his draft opinion and do this to it.
The subject matter of the call reigns.
So I agree. Let's have the conversation. But the thing is, if Roe gets overturned, then for the first time, in a certain way, a lot of people's opinions about abortion will actually matter. Because up until now, if pro-life people have wanted to pass any substantive legal restrictions on abortion, it's got to be through the Supreme Court. It's got to be overturning it. I'm not opposed to, it's like, hey, pro-life and pro-choice people, let's come together and let's actually talk about this and let's have the public debate in every state, in every town, and all of that. That's what should have been happening the whole time. And to some level has, obviously. Abortions have been going down since, pre-Roe. There's some early research that suggests that maybe it's started going up for the first time since then. But the abortion rate is lower than it was when abortion was illegal. And so, at least illegal in a lot of states. And that's significant. This is going to become more of a conversation now, and I think that's a good thing.
Changes to the topic.
This has been A Closer Look.
All right. I thought that was at least sometimes pretty dishonest and at least making some pretty poor arguments, but that's not a huge surprise to me. I don't think every point he made was completely off base. There's a little bit of common ground in there, but I hope that was helpful. So if you want to learn more about how to have dialogues in the way that we have found to be the most effective, because that is going to be really, really important now. And it's going to be harder now because pro-choice people are more upset, more frustrated, more afraid. Those are all things that make dialogues harder. Then get the Equip for Life course. It's about a 4 or 5 hour course now. It's online. You can watch as many times as you want. You can get a permanent membership. There's a coupon code that's going to be on the screen. You can get 10% off of it. This is a really important time to be preparing to have those conversations. So having said that, go have a good conversation.